So a warm welcome. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are today. Welcome to the Mindfulness Centre of Excellence. This is the third in a series of monthly videos running online from the Mindfulness Centre of Excellence in London. And delighted to welcome Juliet Adams as our third guest. And so the format here is welcoming everybody that's joining us online. And anybody that's watching this video later on, because we're making a recording of it to share what we're learning and discovering together. Juliet and I are going to have a bit of a dialogue around the topic of let's talk about intention, a really important topic in and of itself, but also particularly as relates to mindfulness. And we'll go for about 40-45 minutes, and then we'll go to some questions. So hopefully getting a bit of debate, getting a bit of discussion going with those of you who are here with us in the live webinar. So just to say, Juliet and I met, we were trying to figure this out the other day, but some years ago now, in the context of a Mindfulness at Work conference that Juliet had organized, and she might talk a little bit more about that when we start. And I suppose what inspired me about Juliet was it was clear from the start that she was one of the pioneers. You know, she had a kind of a confidence in what she was doing. She had integrity in the practices that she was doing for herself and wanting to share with others. But she really had a mind that was thinking bigger picture, thinking context, thinking how can we make this accessible in the places where we work, which may need a little bit more adapting and a little bit more sophistication in terms of the delivery. So I was really inspired by that and really excited to hear more about her work. And over time, sort of developing a relationship, I ended up doing the workplace mindfulness training that she runs with her colleague, Marina. A really great experience, and definitely a course I would recommend to others in terms of, again, just really the integrity of it and the practice and linking it to the real world. So it's really a delight to welcome you to this webinar. So do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, and then I'll put up the slides and we'll go through what you've prepared?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think actually I know a lot of the people on the call, but for those of you accessing the recording afterwards, I'm Juliet Adams, formal background, corporate learning and development. Became interested in mindfulness actually as part of developing leadership programs. I felt that there was something missing that I needed to be equipping leaders with, and I didn't know what that something was. Discovered it via mindfulness, and unwittingly got sucked into the world of mindfulness that now accounts for probably 3/4, probably a bit more actually than that, of everything I do work-wise.
Great. And so this is really why we're excited to have Juliet here, because she's really kind of down on the ground and seeing what's working, checking things out, adapting and all sorts of interesting things. But the topic that she's going to be really sharing with us today is intention. So I'm going to just pull up the slides and share that. Just hold on for 2 seconds. There we go. So I guess, Juliet, let's start off with hearing a little bit from you about your experiences delivering mindfulness in the workplace. How can you?
So I first became interested in workplace applications of mindfulness when I attended a talk on the neuroscience of mindfulness at the Coaching Association conference back in, I think it was 2008. Now, back in those days, there was little information on workplace mindfulness, and the topic of conversation was very much mindfulness at work. Great idea, but how the hell do we do it? So in 2012, I didn't have all the answers, and I still don't. So I organised the first Mindfulness at Work conference to explore this. I trained initially as an MBCT mindfulness trainer and have since delivered mindfulness training in a wide range of organisational settings. Sometimes mindfulness programs in the workplace don't deliver the full range of expected benefits, and I became curious as to why this was. In my personal experience, getting people to attend mindfulness training and take an interest is rarely the problem. But what people really struggle with is making the time to practice. And only with time and experience gained from practice do they get to the stage where they gain valuable insights into their patterns of thinking and behaviour that in turn enable them to manage themselves better and improve their productivity, performance, relationships, well-being and happiness. So I question, why is the practice element of mindfulness training often such a problem for newcomers? Well, in the past, 40 minutes of daily mindfulness practice was the recommended dose, but these days research suggests that statistically significant improvements in workplace performance can be gained by practicing mindfulness for around 10 minutes or more a day. So really, finding the time shouldn't be the issue. Matt Killingsworth's Harvard research suggests that on average the mind wanders for around 47% of the day, and this provides a great incentive to practice mindfulness daily, as 10 minutes of daily mindfulness practice can result in hours more productivity in a week. But despite this, newcomers to mindfulness still seem to struggle to sit down and practice regularly. It's a problem for every mindfulness teacher I speak to. Lack of practice is certainly one of the reasons why many corporate mindfulness programs fail to deliver their full potential. Organisations, I think, are unclear about their intentions for running the programs, and those who attend may lack a clear intention for attending and an intention for practicing. And lack of clarity of intention for practicing mindfulness can lead to reduced outcomes of training. We recently wrote an article about this in Positive and Mindful Leadership magazine.
Yeah, so this was an article that Juliet and I wrote, which was sort of why mindfulness doesn't always work in organisations, and I think that's going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. Is that right? Is Armin?
I think so, yeah. Yes, he emailed us, didn't he?
Yeah, so I'll put a link to that. But Positive and Mindful Leadership is a great magazine where they're blending mindfulness and some of the understanding from positive psychology, but particularly with interest in the workplace and also with an interest in the next generation of leaders, you know, nurturing the millennials coming up into these roles. And I guess, you know, I think that experience might be shared with others who are watching, this idea that it's not kind of hard to sell mindfulness in terms of the interest, and people come to the lunch and learns and they come to the tasters, they're really curious, they love the science language, but it's like, what stops them from really just either practicing or from it really embedding in organizations? And you know, this is where we ended up at the notion of intentions. So do you want to just talk us through this slide here?
Yeah, sure. So Shauna Shapiro, a professor of psychology at Santa Clara University, is known for her work on mindfulness, and she identified what she called the three axioms of mindfulness. I call them elements that have a major impact on the practice of mindfulness. So they are intention and attention and attitude. So if you take the example of practicing mindfulness, you set an intention to be mindful, fully present to your experience, maybe for the next 10 minutes or however long you're practicing that day. Your intention then focuses your attention on your thoughts, emotions, and physiology. Attitudes like kindness and openness help you to remain focused, because beating yourself up every time you find that your mind's wandered or harshly judging yourself just makes things even harder. Kindness and acceptance help your brain to retain conscious control. So intention as a core component of mindfulness practice is often completely overlooked, and its importance really can't be underestimated.
Yes, and we were talking a bit earlier on, weren't we, about just in that micro moment before you start a practice, whether it's a breath practice or it's mindfulness of the posture. You know, there's that nanosecond where you can give even a verbal instruction to your brain, or you can just make explicit what it is that you're going to do. And this for me is the intentionality piece. I understand this to be part of the driver for that acting with awareness subscale that we have in the 5-factor mindfulness questionnaire. This capacity to know what we're about to do just before we do it. You know, not only does this help us kind of edit and be more flexible and skillful in our responding, we have that free won't element that Patrick Haggard has also spoken about. But it also means that in our moving forward, we can really be clear about what we're doing. We can really be clear about the skills that we need to use in the workplace. We can really be clear about which mindset is going to be most helpful for us. And then in the practice, one of my colleagues at Dragon Cafe, he really always just says, you know, I just say to myself in my brain before I start, brain, now I want you to pay attention to the breath. So the intention is then setting up the expectancies to find breath and the kind of speed at which it can then say, no, 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 that's not breath. Don't do that. Don't stay there. Yeah, and this model of Shapiro, I mean, I really, really like it, working with this a lot, IAA, and I'll perhaps pop a link. She has a nice YouTube video where she talks about this. I'm just making a note to send some links underneath. So then in terms of, I guess, for yourself, Juliet, I mean, say a little bit more about your interest in intention. And
so my interest in intention came firstly via mindfulness, because I quickly discovered via my own mindfulness practice that if I consciously set an intention at the start of a mindfulness practice session, I seem to get much more out of it. So, for example, I might set the intention to observe the patterns of my wandering mind, and this seemed to really help me to practice and cultivate mindfulness. So much later on, it occurred to me that conscious or unconscious intention has far-reaching impacts on pretty much everything we do. It's that overlooked magic ingredient that's free for anyone and everyone to use, and its impact is absolutely massive. I started to think of intention as mindfulness plus one, because mindfulness provides a foundation of self-awareness and knowledge that enables you to identify your core intentions in life. A core intention is something you really, really want at a very deep, sincere level, rather than just a passing fad or fancy. Once a core intention is identified, mindfulness helps you to become more aware and more open to opportunities that arise that help you to achieve your intent. Often subtle things that you wouldn't notice if you were very busy and you lacked the ability to objectively observe the inner workings of your mind. Mindfulness is by no means essential if you want to work with intention, but it definitely acts as a turbocharger for your intent.
So it seems like there is this kind of link with mindfulness, but then it also is a prerequisite maybe for the mindfulness. And I guess I'm wondering as well, you know, people might have different associations in their minds when they think about the definition of of intention. We know that the definition of the word mindfulness is problematic. You know, so where are we at with the language of intention, or what does that word actually mean?
So the word intention comes from Latin intentius, a stretching forward. The American Heritage Dictionary defines it as an aim that guides action. But the one I like is Leonard Lasko, a physician and researcher, who refers to it as a holding attention on a desired outcome. And holding attention requires will, which is a persistent, focused desire.
Yeah. Sounds a little bit like working memory there to me, that sense of holding something in mind, but maybe not quite the same as the normal working memory that we think of. Let me go.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk us through this then.
Okay, so for the book, I wanted to have a definition of mindfulness, and what we ended up coming up with is a deep, sincere desire that activates your will and focuses your attention, harnessing various cognitive processes, leading to actions which make things happen. You can just bear with me a moment while I just go to some of my notes.
Yes, well, we'll pause a minute and let's sort of allow that to sink in. So I'll read that again, maybe. So Juliet and I have been having these discussions in the context of a book that we're working on together. So that rather optimistically says Adams and Russell 2018.
Yeah.
It is in prep, so let's see how 2018 goes. But, you know, so there's something within this, a deep, sincere desire. So, I mean, already that for me makes me almost want to put my hands on my heart, you know.
Yeah.
there's something here in the heart that is really calling, we might refer to it as our calling, our passion. And when we're following something we're passionate about, it's very easy to focus your attention, actually, your will and your attention.
Yeah, I mean, actually, doing so allows you to harness various cognitive processes, brain networks leading to actions which then make things happen. That's the way I see it. What do you think?
Yes, well, it's how, for me, this is about where does mind and brain meet? And, I know there's a big philosophy of mind question there that people might have their own opinions on. But for me, it's something about, we have this wetware of the brain, we have the conditioning of the brain, the neural networks, the neural habits and pathways. But somewhere there is also will, when we make a decision that something is really important. Actually, we hear stories of incredible feats, mothers lifting up cars to rescue babies and all sorts of things that even sound physically impossible, because there is such a deep, sincere, heartfelt desire that really impacts on the physicality of the brain and the thinking of the brain and the movement of the body, so that we can change things, we can have efficacy in the world around us. But it's not just the brain, I suppose, and this is where some of our discussions went, well, we've got this brain, we've got these networks, how do we really fine-tune them? And this is a suggestion to say, well, let's look to the heart maybe, or let's look to this deeper parts of self to see if that can be some fuel for us. So you mentioned that conscious or unconscious intentions, and that's a kind of intriguing phrase there, have a wide range of applications. They kind of impact on everything we do. So, I mean, what can you say a bit more about that? Expand a bit more?
Yes, certainly. I believe that intention is a surprisingly widely researched area. It impacts on all the areas on this diagram that you've just displayed and many more. It's a widely discussed element of many neuroscience and philosophical studies. It shapes your ability to lead others and your attainment at work. If you study healing techniques like Reiki or methods of manifestation, once you strip them all down to their core, the active ingredient is actually focused intention. Now, my intention, I think your intention for our book Intention Matters, is to break down the precise elements involved in working with intent from a science-based perspective. And in this way, blind faith is no longer a requirement, and the power of intention becomes much, much more accessible to a much wider audience. What do you think?
Yes, I think so. I mean, we still end up sometimes having these discussions about philosophy of mind and, mind and brain distinctions. But I think certainly there is enough evidence to suggest that we have this capacity, wherever it comes from, to harness and direct, particularly our attention. And then, as Shapiro's model says, also we have choices about how we want to relate to things, this attitudinal piece. Of course, we have preferences and we have conditioning and we have habits. But underneath all of that, there is always a choice about how to relate. And in my work, I suppose I found that, the more complex the situation is, the more helpful it is to work with these attitudinal intentions. If I don't know what I'm going to say in a difficult conversation, then I can set the intention to just be compassionate. Or if I've got something that I'm feeling fearful about and I'm not sure, or I'm taking a risk, I'm taking a psychological risk or some sort of risk, can I set my intention to courage? So this is different than having a goal to be courageous. This is a different kind of thing. I mean, do you want to say anything about the difference between goals and intentions? Because we talk about this a fair bit as well.
Yeah, intentions are often confused with goals, but there are a number of critical differences. From an early age at school, we're taught to set goals and work towards them. We're taught that goals must be smart, specific, possible to measure and track, achievable, realistic and bound by time. And while SMART goals might help me to get a school assignment in on time, or meet a performance target at work, or deliver a project on time, they can be highly restrictive and limiting. Their narrow focus, the narrow focus of goals can both be a help and a hindrance, depending on the circumstance. Goals can inhibit creativity and innovation and be a barrier to achieving what's really important. Now, in our forthcoming book, Intention Matters, we've broken down the process that takes place when you set an intention. We call it the Intention Activation Model, or IAM for short. If you could put on slide 5, please, Tamara.
Yeah, there you go.
Goals share some of the same processes as intentions, but they lack or only partially activate certain key activities of the mind and the brain. So, for example, some of the processes by which the mind tasks the brain with the cognitive processes necessary to turn intentions into reality, they're either missing or only partially activated by goals. So goal setting can lead to unstructured or partial activation of will, which in turn leads to less than satisfactory applications of focused attention. This is why goal setting can be ineffective. It often fails to effectively stimulate the mind and the brain to take action and make things happen.
Yeah, and I'm just, looking at that, there's that sense, isn't there, that, whenever we, well, for some, and maybe particularly those with the perfectionist traits out there, that sense that we always move the goalposts. I suppose that's what I think about when I think about goals. It's like, well, whose goals are they? Who implanted those goals in my mind? I've reached that goal. Guess what? There's no time to even pause and enjoy it, because suddenly the goalposts have changed and there's kind of higher and faster and better and more, all of that kind of striving mind. Whereas intentions has a slightly more internal quality for me. And often I run this exercise in some of my training, let's explore the embodied experience of the difference between intentions and goals. And, it's different for different people, but in the main, most people find goals a bit stressy and intentions a bit softer. That's a bit more forgiving. Maybe intentions are a bit more forgiving. If you don't quite reach them, then you can honor the steps that you took rather than focusing on all the places that you didn't get to.
But they don't act as a straitjacket, do they?
Yeah.
So a goal is so specific sometimes. It's great because it is specific, but sometimes it's so specific that other things that may serve you better don't become apparent because you aren't tasking your brain to tune into them or notice them.
Exactly, and I love that language. You're not asking or tasking your brain to be in a certain mode. And the other example that comes to mind, I suppose, thinking about the NHS, the National Health Service here in the UK, the intention is to provide compassionate care, but the system has become very caught up in goal-oriented outcomes, targets, ticking boxes. So, are these things even compatible? One might ask in an average healthcare provider, and maybe actually they need help being really clear when they're in different modes. That really caring, compassionate mode is, the treatment is sitting next to the patient and holding their hand, while they need you. And that for them might be the best experience of the treatment. And yet the system is very much geared towards another mode. Yeah.
I mean, one of the most unlikely heroes of intention, here in the UK, a number of years back now, there was an Olympic skier called Eddie the Eagle.
Oh.
Now, Eddie the Eagle, bless his cotton socks, didn't come from a terribly privileged background, but as a very young boy set a clear intention that he wanted to compete at the Olympics. Now, he didn't know quite what he wanted to compete as, but he knew that he wanted to get to the Olympics and compete. And so he tried various sports and found out he was pretty hopeless at most of them. And then he struck upon the fact that there wasn't a ski jumping team for Britain for the Winter Olympics. So all he had to do was achieve a certain standard, and the standard, I believe, by ski jumping standards wasn't actually that high, but all he needed to do to compete at the Olympics was achieve that. And through sheer grit and determination and intention, he got to the Olympics, and he did set a record for Britain. The question that always tickles me is if he had set an intention to be the very best ski jumper there could be in the world, might his achievements have been different? And might he have continued to go on to worldwide fame because he shone brightly as the unlikely hero that everyone was backing because he just tried so hard, although he wasn't perhaps the most talented at it. If his intention had been not just to compete but to actually be the best, might his outcomes have been different? I don't know.
Well, and I watched that film on the plane, actually. I thought it was great. I was getting really into it by the end. I think I was even sort of tearful at one point. It was a very moving film. But there was also something about intentions and this being a bit more forgiving. So intentions do let you make mistakes. They do let you revisit and retry and try again and try a little bit differently. Your compass can still be oriented in the vague direction that you want to go in, but you've got lots more flexibility to figure out how exactly you're going to get there. And maybe also there's a willingness that you get to might be something totally different, you know, and this is this element of deep trust in the process that sometimes people tap into when they're starting to go deep into their mindfulness practice, that really kind of trusting in the moment, trusting in the process, less preoccupied with, you know, what's going to come out the other end of the funnel. Now, can we translate that into the business context is another question. I don't know.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely, because intention is so much more powerful. You think about starting a meeting with a certain intention rather than a goal. You think of how different the outcome could be. Of course, there are certain agenda items, but a lot of top organisations are actually ditching the agenda and agenda points and just starting off with, what is our intention for this meeting? What do we want to achieve? Instead of going through an agenda. And they're reporting that they're getting through the agenda in half the time. They're getting a lot more done. So, you know, whilst goals, I mean, my master's degree is in training and performance management. So I spent a career developing performance management frameworks, you know, goals. But actually, it's being proven nowadays, a lot of these performance management frameworks simply don't work. All they do is activate the threat response. They don't actually motivate people towards a rewarding goal. So I think, although goals have their place and goals can help you towards intention, holding that bigger intention is actually where it's at. You know, an intention to be the best manager, the best leader that you can be. And you may not know what that looks like when you start the intention journey, but opportunities will arise that you'd otherwise be blinded to if you, for instance, said, I'm going to be a charismatic leader and read all the books on charismatic leadership and then mold yourself on that. So it's allowing things to emerge.
Yes, allowing, and it's some element of unlimited possibilities, really unlimited possibilities, yeah. And so, I mean, we thought that we might share a little bit in this dialogue about our process of attempting to work mindfully and with intention in the process of writing the book. And, you know, I think this might be useful to people because there's lots of people out there working on books and, you know, all the traditional kind of struggles of writing. But I guess what's been my experience working with you more closely, as we have been now over the last 6 months or so, maybe longer, you know, just, a little bit, let's dialogue about that intentional collaboration writing process. I don't know if you want to kick off or...
Yeah, I'll kick off, and I hope I will do you honour with this, because like you, I've written several books now, and I know the process that works best for me. And I like to work first on a skeleton for the book, starting with section headings, then chapters, then headings within each chapter. And then this is the framework that I tend to write content around. And if when writing I find something that isn't working or is missing, I may revise the chapter or the book's table of contents, but I still need that structure before I can start writing. In addition, I often only work out what I really think or what I want to say when I'm writing, and sometimes I struggle, to be honest, to explain exactly what I want to say before I've gone through this process. Now, your style, Tamara, is very different. You have so many ideas popping up and you like to follow the ideas and trains of thoughts and inspirations that arise. And you often have the opposite problem to me. You know exactly what you want to say, but sometimes struggle to then structure it into a manner that makes it accessible for the reader. So in the early days of working with you, I must admit, you sent me completely dizzy, and I found it really difficult to focus. And to be honest, without a little bit of mindfulness, I might have fallen into the trap of thinking that things had to be done in a certain way, my way, or my emotional response might have triggered behaviours that might have been a little bit less than helpful. So with such different working styles, it's been essential to agree the structure of the book so that we could then work independently on different chapters. And setting an intention for what we hope the book will achieve certainly made this easier for me. Also, setting an intention to find a really good way of working together was very helpful. It allowed us, I think, to both be honest about our needs and our preferences so that we both got what we needed and were happy sometimes to compromise. And by exploring and making explicit our intentions about how we wanted to work together, we were able to resolve any issues as they arose. I mean, I don't know what you think.
No, well, I'm also discovering in the co-writing process, you know, as one does in creative endeavors, we meet our minds, we meet our habits and our patterns, and you know, that shock when you realize that other people do it differently, and sometimes how they do it feels, you know, the opposite of how you would like to do it. And I suppose for me, the observation, was the mindfulness allowed us to be okay with our cognitive diversity. It allowed us to be okay with our different styles. The intention piece, I think, did provide that kind of structural energy for the direction of travel. But, you know, you had your way of getting there, I had my way of getting there, and the intention sort of was the glue that kind of allowed it to come together. I suppose the other thing I have noticed about working with you and people that have been kind of practicing a bit more is the capacity to pay attention for longer. Yeah, I mean, our writing days, some of them were quite long. And, you know, towards the end, we kind of can notice some tiredness, some less willingness to be flexible. And this kind of like, I need it like this now because I'm not liking it. And both of us in opposite directions, as we discovered. But, you know, the amount of focus and concentration, the capacity to keep going through the day, I think also is something that I'm becoming more aware of when I work with experienced mindfulness practitioners. And it's great, you know, because you just get so much done. Yeah.
It's just grit and determination, really, and being a stubborn cuss.
Well, but also the mindfulness way is it's about the quality of the attention. So I'm going to a more serious.
I'm being flippant.
Yeah, you know, we have that different, you know, because we're attending to how we attend, and we practice alert, relax. You know, you don't get that fatigue that you get from the kind of, I need to just push through and get this thing done, and I need to just force my mind to focus on this last thing, which I can remember.
You mean the zone of delusion where you're working hard and achieving nothing?
Yes, exactly that zone. Yeah. So, and the other thing that sticks in my mind as well is, of course, you know, caring for the body while we work, you know, so moving locations, moving the body, doing some stretching, you know, working with another mindfulness practitioner. They totally au fait if you just want to get up and start stretching around the table, or you need to start walking around, or you need to be in the body. And so for me, this is the care and compassion piece, actually, which is how do we care for each other's minds, care for each other's kind of, you know, writers' egos that are there, give them the little monkey nuts, but don't feed them too much. And then how do we care for the body as well in this work? But with the overarching intention of, you know, let's use these vehicles that we have to the best of our ability to share what it is that we want to share with others. And I don't know if now is a good time maybe to go to the next slide where, you know, some of the results of this, you've already mentioned a little bit the model that we were developing. So I'm thinking the next slide maybe is this. Do you want to talk a little bit about this then?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, some people might say what we're doing actually with this book is the same as The Secret and the Law of Attraction. But there's a little-known 1940s book called Consciously Creating Circumstances by George Winslow, which forms much of the basis for the book called The Secret, because both of them are really concerned with harnessing the power of intention. But many people have been disappointed by the results produced by the methodologies in these books that seem to require a blind faith without, some might argue, sufficient underpinning rationale. The difference with our book, Intention Matters, is that we spent an awful lot of time considering why and how intention works, focusing especially on processes of the mind and brain and ways to overcome obstacles and barriers. So, in a nutshell, we're exploring intention from a really practical, science-based perspective. So, people can start to work with intention by using the model on this screen. Once you're familiar with the components of intention, as we'll describe in the book and I alluded to in the other model, the intention activation model, you can use this idea model to get started. So in order to really effectively work with intention, you need to identify clearly both your core and your nested intentions, then distill these as necessary. You can then take steps to embed these into your brain and remain vigilant for opportunities to take action that help you towards the achievement of your intention. So, what are your thoughts? What would you like to?
Well, I just, the phrases that comes to my mind is about saving energy.
Yeah.
And, you know, the value of energy, this is something we would talk about a lot in Tai Chi, in the martial arts. Certainly in the internal martial arts, we would be talking a lot about intention, mind intention, transmitting mind intention into the body. And a big part of that theory is about don't waste energy, don't waste effort. You know, be really clear, what is the function of the move that you're doing? What is the minimum amount of variance of movement that you can train? How can it have direction, but also flexibility? You don't want to be too rigid with the moves because your opponent might move, you know, and to much more refined and sort of subtle levels as well. But I like this idea really. I mean, what's your experience for most people? What really gets in the way of identifying intentions, or what's been your experience of that?
Often, again, it's this definitely the confusion between goals and intentions, because goals are so programmed into us from a young age, so it can be really difficult for people to get away. But a person may say, you know, I want to have a huge mansion and a, you know, big posh car, but actually, do they really want that, or is that somebody else's dream, or is that society or social media putting pressure on them? So it's the ability to separate what you really, really, really want, and I can't do an impression of the Spice Girls here. What do you really, really want? You know, what at a deep level do you really want? What's important? What really lights you up? So it's this deep, sincere desire, which is the starting point. And a goal, you don't start with a deep, sincere desire. It's not there at all.
Yeah.
So it's a process, and this is where mindfulness sits so nicely with intention of, okay, this is what I think is my intention. And then you can use mindfulness to sit with it. So how does the body feel when you hold this? You know, can you notice a lift in your energy? Does it feel right? What's your gut telling you? You know, what thoughts are coming up? Is your body tensing up? Is it relaxing? Is it tingling? Are there any emotions? And these are all things that mindfulness can help you tune into. So if it doesn't sit right or feel right, then you can test different things. And often, for some people, they start with the big core intention and then the nested intention. So the little steps along the way come out of that. For other people, they start with the goal and then identify the nested intention, and then from the nested intention finally work out what the core intention is. So, for instance, an entrepreneur in India that I was working with, he thought that it was all about selling water purifiers, but actually his deep, sincere, and that was actually a nested intention, because what he really wanted to do was, you know, to provide sanitation and a quality of life for people in all developing countries. So, you know, the water purification plant was just an element that contributes towards that, but he thought that that was his core intention. Whereas a manager that I was working with, you know, they were very much fixed on their goals, their corporate goals, and starting with their corporate goals, they worked upwards to work out actually what do they really value in life, what was important, what do they really, really deeply want to achieve, and then the whole thing shook out back from there. So it's still work in progress. I'm still writing some of the words for the chapters around this, and still, as I said earlier, I tend to work things out as I write rather than necessarily knowing where I'm going until I put my fingers on the keyboard. So this is work in progress, but this idea of identifying and then distilling. So again, often with some of the other works on intention, it'll just be about identify and then in quotes send it out to the universe or a greater force, and then it's going to happen. Well, you're missing the distilling because your intention, your initial idea of your intention or what you want may be completely incorrect.
Yeah.
And then so you're not distilling, and you know, some of the opportunities some of the embedding naturally occurs from the distilling, to be honest. But once you have an idea of how all of this works, it's then much easier to fine-tune it, test it, refine it, troubleshoot it, and get it working for you.
And as you're talking, what comes to my mind is the role of really taking some dedicated space and time to think about this. So, you know, maybe someone might go on retreat, or they might have a pause in their day or space in their day. You know, this can be quite deep work. You know, nice to do it with a coach or somebody as well. And I know that that's kind of something that you offer to your corporate people. But actually revisiting it, giving it time, revisiting it again, checking, is this still true for me now? Is this still true for me now? You know.
And exactly. But for some people who haven't got time, I mean, obviously a retreat, lovely. You can get to your deeper truth a lot of the time when you create that space and stillness. But for some people, they just don't have the time to do that. So let's start at where they're at. So if it's a goal is where they're at, let's work from there and see where we go. And we'll get moving and we'll get some momentum happening. And then often the more people work with this, the more they distill, refine, and eventually they get to where they're going. Obviously, if you're one of those rare people who knows exactly, you know, what your intentions are, that does make life a lot easier.
Yeah. And I suppose some of the discussion that we have around the mindfulness practice, and I spoke a little bit about this in the hashtag What is Mindfulness book, is, you know, that sense that sometimes the reason why mindfulness doesn't work is people are still very busy doing mindfulness practices, and they haven't really checked in, you know, with why is this important? How important is it? How much money have I got to spend on this? How much time am I going to give it? So I have this whole chapter of like approaching mindfulness practice with intention, because it's, you know, it's like you're going to the gym and you don't just go to the first one and then go, oh, it's a squash club. Oh, well, I'll play squash because I want to do exercise. You know, you think about who you are and what time you've got and when you're going to train and how much money you want to spend at the gym, and do you need it to have a spa, and, you know, what do you need around it to kind of make you actually go and do it. And if you don't have this container around our mindfulness practice, you know, I see this leads to people getting disappointed, frustrated, giving up. Why do I have to go on the breath? Well, you know, we talked a little bit, didn't we, about this distal and proximal intentions. The distal intention is, well, actually you need to train your brain, and this is an object that you're using to train it. So, you know, get back to the breath, you know, but the distal intention is, why am I doing mindfulness? Why do I want to spend my time doing this? Why am I putting effort into this? And in many practitioners of secular mindfulness, there's a slight gaping hole there. Now, if you're in the spiritual traditions, it's all taken care of, no problem. You know, the intention is, you know, praise God, worship your deity, be nice to people, live by some certain rules and principles. All of that space has been taken care of for you. And this may be why, I'm wondering if this might be why our modern world, in the same way, is thirsting for mindfulness, because we're so distracted. You know, there is this sense of people looking, well, what is the meaning? What is the purpose? It can't just be this endless, consumptive, repetitive, round and round and give me a mental health problem life, that kind of, is that right? They're really questioning. So I feel that's the timeliness of this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Because let's face it, if you've suffered from deep recurrent depression, you've got a damn good reason to maybe apply some effort to sitting down and practicing, because you don't want to be that way anymore. If you're suffering from ongoing chronic constant pain, again, something that might help reduce the pain or your suffering, it's a damn good reason to practice. But in the workplace, I think the problem is that it can be got intellectually, but you only really get the benefits from practicing. And if you don't practice enough, you don't feel the benefits and you don't see the reason. So the intentionality, the why am I doing this, that's often completely missing. It's just, sounds like a good thing. Yeah, get the principles intellectually, but the deeper why gets lost. And I think that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, and that for me, then that's the bit that we need to hold on to, when either it's hard to practice or the mind is very distracted or like loads of ideas are coming and we're being asked to let go of them, having that thing in mind. Now, is it working memory, or is it a sort of a different kind of working memory that's more linked to values? Sometimes we've been talking about that, haven't we? Like, how do we hold in mind our values as we're going around and operating in this very busy, distracted, complex environment where everything's a million miles an hour. So our intention then is with this book is to help people that are getting a bit lost with their mindfulness, or they want to supercharge it, as you say, mindfulness +1. So is there anything else you want to add? Otherwise, I'll kind of start wrapping up and then we'll go to see if there's any kind of discussion and chats. But just I'll pause there for a minute just to see if there was anything else that you might want to cover or share, or anything that's coming spontaneously that you might think is helpful for our listeners to know about.
Well, I see this work on intention really for many different audiences. So, the primary audience is obviously people either teaching mindfulness and wanting to improve the impact of the programs, but also people trying to practice mindfulness and wondering, why they're struggling with it. So I certainly see that's one audience. But also there may be an audience who just have a little bit of mindfulness and just want to find a better way of working with their brain. So you don't have to be mindful to work with intention. You don't have to come on a course and do the full caboodle and have your regular practice, but it really does help.
Yeah, great. So for those that are joining us for the questions and answers, we will come to you in just in 1 second. But for now, I'm going to close the recording. I'm going to say thank you very much to Juliet for sharing some of her wisdom, some of her experiences, and kind of giving this opportunity to share a bit about our process of the forthcoming book, Intention Matters. You can see on the screen that there's a Facebook page where we're kind of posting some updates about the work that we're doing. You can also find Juliet at www.aheadforwork.com/intention if you want to read about the book, but she's also the author of Mindful Leadership for Dummies, which contains the Workplace MT program. And she's also co-author of Mindfulness at Work for Dummies with Shamesh Aladina. So maybe she has some other books that I've forgotten, but those are really the two main ones. And
those are the key ones. What I would just like to add, if you don't mind me talking over you, is the aheadforwork.com/intention. There's a mailing form on that page. So anyone who's interested in us letting them know when the book is going to come out, so they can be one of the first to receive copies, that's the place to sign up. So that's where the sign up form. We're not going to spam you. It is purely just I mean, I haven't got the time to send out all of this stuff for a start. It's just purely going to be to let people know, firstly, when the book comes out, and secondly, if there are any training events. There certainly won't be much volume of email traffic via it, but we just then know that you're interested.
Yeah, great. And just to say, for those that are watching, the next webinar is going to be April 26th. I'll be talking to Anthony Fiedler, who'll be sharing his experience of a very deep way of working with intention, which is having an intention not to react to psychotic experiences in the mind. So he is going to be a really fascinating person to talk to. He works with the body, he works with Tai Chi, and this is part of the, you know, how can we recreate and re-understand some of what's going on in the psychiatric work, and work with a deeper level of intentionality around that. So signing off now from this webinar, and those who are online, we're coming to questions now. So thank you very much, everybody, and I wish you a day or a night with intention, mindfulness, heartfulness, and take care. Stopping the video now.